This was the largest meeting of psychotherapists ever held. 7,000 therapists attended and listened to a faculty composed of the major teachers of therapy of the world. This meeting was held in honor of Milton H. Erickson, a psychiatrist who changed the way people think about hypnosis and innovated a new approach to psychotherapy. He was considered the dean of medical hypnosis when he died in 1980, and he had achieved worldwide fame. 50 institutes around the world have been established in his name, and over 100 books have been written about his work. His achievements came in spite of, or as he said, because of, personal handicaps which would have incapacitated most people.
And did you know you could go into a trance that you're not deeply? But you can't you? With your eyes wide open. And I wonder if you would like to look over there. Over there. I wonder what visualization you could achieve as you looked over there.
Hypnosis is one of the mysteries of life. It's been investigated and researched over the centuries, and it was always the subject of controversy. It's like electricity. People know how to use it without exactly knowing what it is. Milton Erickson added a new dimension to this mystery. Before him, it was assumed one had to follow special rituals to hypnotize someone. Among the main ways of inducing trance, there were two major approaches. One was a ritual induction, where the subject looked at a point or concentrated on a circle or a swinging watch. Trance was said to come from that fixation and tiredness of the eyes. The second ritual was one where a person was told to relax all over his body. Trance was considered a state like sleep. Erickson contributed the view that hypnosis is a result of a special communication between hypnotist and subject. Therefore, trance can be induced in many ways. He would hypnotize someone while walking up and down. Therefore, eye fixation or relaxation wasn't necessary. Or while giving a lecture, he would hypnotize someone in the audience. He also hypnotized people outside their awareness. His investigations made hypnosis more a subject of scientific study, but also made it more of a mystery.
It seemed compellingly important for me to visit Milton Erickson. So I was nervous about being there and unsure of myself and really didn't know what to expect or what was I going to say to him. And I walked in the door at 10:30 at night, and this is Dr. Erickson. And Erickson looked up at me. Didn't say hello. Well, I was standing there cataleptic because nobody had ever said hello to me like that before. Roxy took me into the next room and explained that her father was a practical joker. But it really wasn't a practical joke, it was an induction of hypnosis. So he was truly the most playful human being that I've ever encountered.
While we were talking, I suddenly woke up. And it was a real interesting experience to me. And I woke up. Somehow, I don't know exactly what I mean by that, but I just suddenly realized I wasn't here. And I looked at him, and he smiled and nodded. And it was an interesting experience. I have no idea what he said during that time or what happened, or whether it was 1 second or 1 hour.
And I used to position myself in the audience for the Saturday afternoon demonstration behind the biggest, heaviest man in the room, because I just absolutely didn't want to be seen. And when Milton would come in, I would kind of go like that. Really, I was terrified of him. But it didn't work. And somehow or another, he saw through the person I was sitting behind. He was always very gentle and very kind and never really abrasive, because I would have turned and run.
And now take a deep breath and smile. refreshed and energetic. By the way, what is your name? Pat? Mr. Pat? Do you always keep your hand up in the air like that, times like that? How far are you keeping you up there now? You don't know?
This is an example of the subtle use of communication by Erickson. He would awaken subjects and they would still be in a trance. Apparently he said to awake, but actually he said the subject should feel like she was awake. She feels awake while still in the trance.
I saw Milton as an explicit patient, only a couple of sessions, but I was scared. And to this day, I cannot tell you exactly what he did with me. I can only tell you that a great many things changed within a year and a half after I saw him. It's going to sound a little strange, but I'm not too clear on what we did discuss explicitly. I don't think I was in a trance the whole time.
I want you to discover the difference between your thinking and your doing. And now, I want you to shake your head now. Your name isn't Ruth, is it? And you aren't a girl, are you? And you aren't sitting down, are you? And you aren't in a trance, are you? And you aren't answering me, are you? You're nameless.
He would explain, if you insisted, that he did love to do things and have people wonder how he did that. And in a way, that was a failing, particularly for the beginners who would think, oh my goodness, I'll never be able to learn to do that.
Dr. Erickson, how would you define hypnotic trance?
For me, hypnotic trance, you pay attention when things are immediately important. It isn't important to you to know that while you listen to me, that you are wearing a watch, that you are. You can forget about that. You can forget about your tie, the color of your shoes. You can forget about the chair you're sitting in and pay attention to me. Or you can let your mind wander wherever you wish. In trance state, you focus your attention to the important things. And that's why in therapy, you focus the patient's attention where it should be focused, and where he can call forth memories that he'd long forgotten.
He and I handled one special case in Venezuela. I stopped translating, and he communicated with this person who did not speak English. I don't know. I myself stopped him, and he carried on. So there is communication, non-verbal communication. He called it pantomime,
Erickson always stressed the importance of anthropology in therapy. He told me that the ritual trances, which I was studying in Brazil, and hypnotic trances, were, in his words, the same psychophysiological phenomena with different understandings. Ritual trance, he put it, was a way of channeling disassociation into socially acceptable areas.
These women, possessed by sensuous spirits, are permitted to behave in ways unacceptable in Latin American society. Erickson worked with anthropologists Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson on their material on trance in Bali.
Margaret Mead brought back the film of the Balinese trances. She brought them to Michigan to have Betty and me view them. And she had her notes. And the task before Betty and for me was to watch the films and identify who was in a trance and who wasn't in a trance, who was going into a trance and who was coming out. And I don't know how many films Margaret showed us. On the whole, Betty was more active than I was. Those two little girls are dancing. One is awake and the other's in a trance. The tremendous economy of movement that the ballet showed. And the hypnotic subject always shows a tremendous economy of movement.
By observing natural forms of trance behavior, Erickson learned about unity of movement, trance induction and recovery, trance levels, amnesia, and the pleasure of going into a trance, all of which he applied to clinical hypnosis.
While I've been talking to you, you've altered your respiration. Your heart rate is altered. I know from past experience that your blood pressure has changed. Your pulse has changed. And your eyelid reflexes change. And you really don't need to keep your eyes open, but you can close them now.
You did teach me self-hypnosis, which I use for childbirth. The reason I wanted to use hypnosis was because I wanted to be very much a participant in this. I wanted to observe and watch it, really be involved. He taught me to count backwards from 20. After a while, I just banded to counting backwards, and just when I want to go into trance, I just do it instantly.
I don't bother with anesthesia because it's more bother than it's worth. Without any anesthetic at all, I went into this procedure, had my nose broken, had the bones opened up so that I can breathe, and I didn't have any bleeding during that procedure.
How I went into trance? Certainly, there's so many different ways. Since I'm sitting here, I would just simply put myself into trance. Right after I had surgery, I've lost a lot of blood during surgery, and one of the things that I've been curious about is whether or not one can increase the development of red blood cells through hypnosis. At one point, the physician came in and told me that it was okay to use the hypnosis to disassociate, but one couldn't use hypnosis to make their body heal. Well, one can, believe me, I just did.
Erickson was born poor at the turn of the century in a log cabin in Orem, Nevada, a mining town which has since disappeared. When the mine went broke, his family traveled east in a covered wagon. His father established the family on a small farm in Wisconsin, in this house which still stands. He went to this one-room schoolhouse where he discovered the first of his many problems. He had special difficulty learning to read.
One of his early life experiences was when he could not tell the difference between an M and a 3. The teacher worked with him individually, day after day, making him draw with his hand a 3 and then the M. Until he said, finally, in a blinding flash of light, it suddenly came to me that an M was like a horse whose head bent down to pasture eating. And the 3 was like when the horse reared up. So this sounds typically like a dyslexic thing, shifting the orientation of letters and numbers. But it's interesting that this became the foundation of his later so-called utilization technique. Many years later, for example, Grandma wanted to learn how to read the Bible before she died. So she came to Milton. He says, well, you know what a fork is like. You know what a pitchfork is. Well, an M is nothing but a pitchfork without the handle. So he taught her in terms of ideas that were already in her own mind.
At an early age, Erickson decided to become a doctor, influenced by a kindly physician. However, at the age of 18, Erickson's plans for college seemed impossible when he was struck by polio. He was totally paralyzed, unable to lift a finger. The doctors told him and his mother that he would die before morning. He asked his mother to arrange the mirror on the dresser so he could see out. He wanted to admire his last sunset reflected in the mirror in this upstairs window. Despite the doctor's predictions, the next morning Erickson was still alive, and he continued to be so for the next 60 years.
Basically, Marcia looked after me and put a towel over my face so I couldn't see. And she could touch me on the hand, ask me, tell her where I was touched. I would have to guess. My left leg, my right leg, my abdomen, my hand, my right hand, my left hand, or even my face. It took a long, long time for me to learn where my toes were, or my feet were, and to recognize the individual parts of my body.
They tied him in this rocking chair and they left him for an unaccustomed length of time in the middle of the room, so he looked longingly out the window. He wanted to be able to look out at the farm. So he looked longingly out the window. Here's a 17-year-old kid. He suddenly notices that the rocking chair is starting to rock a little bit. So what's this? My body's paralyzed. How come the rocking chair is starting to rock? Could it be just my wishing and hoping started some of my muscles moving? So incredibly, this little 17-year-old farm kid, he discovered the basic principle of hypnosis that was enunciated over a century earlier by Bernheim, the ideodynamic principle. Of course, Milton did not know that this is hypnosis. But he began giving himself exercises. How did my hand hold a spoon? And he would look at his hand and his fingers. And he would rehearse the sense memory. How did I pick up a spoon? Until one day he was rewarded with a little blip of his finger. And then he was off and running. How did my arm climb a tree, grasp a branch? How did I hold a pitchfork? So before he even heard the word hypnosis, he learned how to use sense memories to bring back whatever sense of mind-body coordination there were and to reinforce it.
All of this, by the way, returned to him virtually before his death. He began to lose the same muscles that he had lost and had regained some of the use of. With a great deal of pain, he began to lose each of these muscles individually and in groups during the last number of years when I was his doctor. He overcame a tremendous amount of handicap with a tremendous amount of drive, but a lot of people just can't do that.
Within a year of his polio attack, Erickson was able to move his upper body and to move his legs with difficulty. Since he was advised to move his arms and shoulders, Erickson took a 1,000-mile canoe trip which would exercise his upper body. He went alone with only a few dollars in his pocket. When he began, he could not walk nor carry his canoe over a dam. By the end of that trip, he could swim a mile and he could walk again.
He wanted to strengthen his legs. So, as I heard it, he got out in the fields. And of course, by this time it was, the fall, and so you just had the fallow field with the furrows hardened.
and dragged himself across the fields hand over hand. His aim was to stimulate those legs and with all the contact that he could give them.
If there's any motivation to get over a handicap, you complete things, no matter what they are. It's almost an obsessional thing. And you're going to do this or die.
That willingness to set aside immediate concerns of pain, humiliation, dirt, just the simplest things in order to reach for something that you know you need. It meant everything to me.
Erickson's problem was how to finance his way through college and medical school. He managed, despite his polio handicap, to work his way through the University of Wisconsin. He reports that he rode a bicycle around Madison, Wisconsin, the college town, looking for a way to make a living. He ended up starting a boarding house for students, and that paid his own room and board. He was interested in both psychology and criminology, and so he obtained a job testing mental patients and criminals. He became acquainted with the whole range of psychopathology, and he obtained a master's in psychology while completing his medical degree. In 1930, he went to Worcester State Hospital, which at that time was the most prestigious hospital for research and training in psychiatry. At Worcester, he quickly rose from being junior psychiatrist to senior psychiatrist to chief psychiatrist on the research service. By that time, his remarkable skills as a hypnotist were being noticed, and he began publishing the first of his 100 papers. In 1933, Dr. Erickson accepted the position as Director of Research and Training at Eloise Hospital and Infirmary in Michigan. He was there for the next 15 years.
He was a genius. He really was. But he was a maverick. I heard about Milton when I was still in medical school. He was the crazy psychiatrist who used to be on the staff at Wayne State University. And we had a lecture one day, about 2 hours, on nothing except the dangers of hypnosis and how you could get in trouble with it. And they talked about this idiot that used to be on the staff out at Eloise and all the things he claimed he could do, that none of which were true, etc., etc. And there was a discussion with several of my classmates afterwards that said they're going to an awful lot of trouble to explain why you should be afraid of hypnosis. I wonder what it's really about. So that when I saw Milton in the first workshop, I didn't realize until about halfway through one of his presentations that this was the man that I had been warned against. I also felt angry that none of my teachers had even mentioned some of the important things that he was telling us about.
It was at Eloise that he did his most intensive research in hypnosis, investigating the limits of its influence. Among his many experiments, he studied how one could induce color blindness. She could not match colors on cards. She couldn't put together red figures and green figures. When she was awake, she was easily able to pass the color blindness test. Erickson also experimented with how to get people to behave immorally or improperly under the influence of hypnosis, and he found he could not. Much of his research was in the laboratory, but he also liked to influence people in natural social settings.
We were married in June of '36 after I graduated from college. And he had 3 young children of a previous marriage of which he had custody. We lived on the hospital grounds. It was a city in itself. It had these tremendous ward buildings. It had a department which had evolved from the county poor farm.
We lived in a building where they had closed wards, but they had screened porches where the patients could come out. And he did not want us to interact with those patients. This was a building with female patients, and their vocabulary was very diverse and wonderfully earthy.
They were wonderful because a lot of them were on our same psychosocial development level, and which I think Daddy used when he had patients in the house. Because there were so many of us, there was always somebody on the appropriate level. But those patients were good friends. And we'd go bicycling or take walks or something. That used me, even in those days, occasionally, when he would want to have a demonstration subject for a teaching session or something.
And suppose you demonstrate to the people here what it is to go into auto-hypnosis. You can talk freely, talk rapidly. Don't take over 2 minutes.
2 minutes?
That's right.
I won't be able to tell them very much.
Don't talk fast.
Well, to go into an auto-hypnotic trance, you don't deliberately try to do anything. You just put yourself into a rather passive state, and what I like to do is to keep my eyes open and fixate my gaze on some rather bright point of light, although many people like to shut their eyes. And you don't exactly look at it, you just allow it to occupy the center of your attention and just wait.
After working at Eloise Hospital for 14 years, Dr. Erickson was advised to go to a climate which was more beneficial for his allergies. He decided to move to Arizona. He worked briefly in the state hospital and then went into private practice. He began to be recognized worldwide, and his major treatment and training procedures began. He founded the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis, and he was the founding editor of its influential journal.
It's a little brick house near downtown Phoenix with 3 bedrooms, and we raised 6 or 8 kids in there for people flying in from New York and Mexico and all over the world. I remember his wife Betty saying to me once that a guy said to her, I never dressed a doll before. Because Christy or Roxy had asked him to dress a doll.
I remember one woman in particular, she was sort of like a symbolic visiting aunt. My father would assign her to take me to Enchanted Park, and I would go fishing. She bought me my first fishing pole. I later learned, of course, that it had tremendous therapeutic importance for her.
One of the things that we did question was when he would assign them particular tasks, which was fairly routine, to go out and walk, a certain number of miles, or around the block 20 times, or weed the rose garden, or something. We all thought it was rather unusual that the patients would always follow through. Why would a grown man go out and weed the rose garden with no pay, just because Dad told him to do it? Why would he do that? When he's obviously on his hands and knees cursing and hating it.
I can't.
One of Erickson's therapy techniques came to be called ordeal therapy.
All right. I have a remedy in mind for you. It will cost you 8 hours sleep. You think you can afford 8 hours loss of sleep? He said, I've been losing that much sleep every night for a year. Of course I can afford it. I said, all right. Tonight when you go home, you take a jar of Johnson, a floor wax, and a rag, and you polish the floor all night long. You polish it till the usual getting up time in the morning. Then you go about the day till you won't lost 2 hours sleep. And the fourth night, Before I began polishing the floor, I told the son, I think I'll rest my eyes for a minute. He woke up at 7 o'clock the next morning. And now on his dressers, carried him down to the floor wax. I'm polishing right. And I told him, you got an illuminated dial clock. If you can read the time of the night on that clock 15 minutes after you go to bed, you polish the floor all night long. He hasn't missed a night's sleep since.
More than anything else, my understanding of how to treat pain was influenced by Erickson. I think he knew more about that than other people whom I have read or worked with, and that's what I really learned a lot from him about. I think fundamentally what I learned was that pain is mutable. All pain is mutable, not just some pain and not just some people, but period. And that was impressive to me. And in some ways that sounds very simple, but I think that that's not something most people know.
Erickson liked to emphasize that his difficulties had a positive effect on his work. An example is pain. He suffered severe pain all his life based on his polio. Some of the cramps he had were so severe that the muscles pulled away from the ligaments. He used auto-hypnosis to control that pain when he could. In the process of understanding and working with his own pain, Erickson understood pain better than any other therapist because he had been down that road himself.
She was in a car in Santa Barbara with a young man, and he drove over a 150-foot embankment. And Nicole was thrown out of the car, and her back was broken. She does have a lot of pain at night, and even in her sleep, she cries out. She probably doesn't remember in the morning.
It only makes your pain worse.
When I'm depressed.
How often is that?
How often? I don't know. I don't know.
What are you depressed about?
A living situation and being in a wheelchair.
How old are you?
19.
And what would you like to have me do for you?
I'd like you to help me walk again.
Yeah, I can't help you walk again, then what?
Help my pain.
And you keep sleeping deeper and deeper until you know what it is you want to forget. There's something else you need to do. To know why you never completed that work of the fancy work of a mouse. You're not using the muscle you have. You got a very smooth face. You're too short a smile, not a wide enough smile. You don't use your muscles around your eyes enough. And you can have a dimple if you wish. Well, that's a dimple is awfully under exercise.
through and...
Yeah, but I never really did anything for myself then. I never did anything that made me happy. I wasn't even around people I liked. You know, I mean, now I have, you know, friends that I really like to be around. You know? And I'm doing things that I like to do, and I'm enjoying them. And then I just didn't have anything going for myself at all. And it's amazing.
I know you are suffering constant pain, constant, stabbing, pulsating pain. I can see it with my eyes. And tell me, madam, if you saw a lean, hungry tiger next to him, only walking into the room, and eyeing you hungrily and licking its chops, how much pain would you feel? I wouldn't feel any under those circumstances. My goodness, I don't feel any pain now. May I take the tiger back to the hospital with me?
He was great on observation. You know, one of the interesting things that was hard for us to grasp in those days, I think, was that he took the way a patient sat down and the way a patient moved as a message to him, not as just an expression about the person. And therefore, he took it that they were telling him something. He said, I'm waiting for a woman to come into my office who has had a very important premarital affair, or is having a very important extramarital affair, who doesn't tell me that by the way she sits down in the chair. He covered the whole range of patients. I mean, he was as comfortable with a raving psychotic as he was with a little kid that he was playing jacks with, or an adolescent that he was talking with. He had a tremendous range.
I needed to study for my master's degree. I'm a physical education teacher. And I kept asking Dr. Erickson, when are you going to prepare me for this burden over my head, which is the passing of my master's degree? And so I studied very diligently at home from June until whenever, almost seemed like 9 months I kept studying. And I kept saying, well, aren't you going to tell me something so that I'm going to feel like I'm going to pass? And he just kept going on and talking as usual, nice manner to me. And he would tell me stories. I would just simply relax in front of him, and I didn't know it was, hypnosis. Back then, just said, well, I'm listening to Dr. E. I'm listening to my father-in-law. He'd start out by saying, I had a patient who, and then before I knew it, oh, it's time to leave.
So I told her, go into a trance, and now forget about your master's examination. Now someday in the future, you'll wander into a certain room at Arizona State University, and you'll see some mimeograph questions and some boo-boos. You won't pay any attention to anybody else in the room. You'll wander over and pick up a mimeograph sheet of questions, a boo-book, and find a comfortable seat, pay no attention to anybody else, and have a nice time daydreaming about your vacation trip. But now and then you can notice your hand is in writing, because you're not really interested in that.
I kept writing and writing. In fact, I was so shocked for the 4 hours. I never took a break. And I raised my hand and said, may I have some more paper? And so for somebody who never wrote anything, I would call that profuse writing. And so actually I had been prepared, but didn't know that I had been prepared.
She came home that day from university, not remembering that she had been there. Now 2 weeks later, here She's taking little names. She told her husband, Robert, there's something awfully wrong here. A letter from the registrar saying I passed my master's examination and I haven't taken it yet.
The therapy session that Milton did with Mondi on the videotape was as typical of him in his later years as anything that he did.
Mommy, this time, I'd like to have you take your time about going into a trance. I don't want you to go into a trance too soon. And you know how easy it is for you. Not quite that fast, Mommy. You hear my voice. And now come to your mind some very nice, happy experience out of your childhood. I'd like to have you describe it.
Splashing in water.
Splashing in water?
Lake.
Tell me more about it.
I'm doing so with total abandonment. I'm about 2 years old.
You're 2 years old? Oh, what? 2-year-old Mondi having a very good time. And memorize all those good feelings. Because there's a lot of them. It's a learning.
He knew I was emotionally very disturbed at that period too. So he saw me very frequently. I don't know if it was 2 or 3 times a week at first. And he told me the first day, he said, I will treat you without charge, but if you stay with it. He said, if you leave, why then I'll have to charge you. I was very glad to have the help. He would tell you a story. It was kind of like Jesus and his parables, I guess. He would illustrate everything with a little story. And you'd get the point, you know. You'd understand exactly what he was saying. He helped with my femininity, so to speak. One time told me this story about, well, can a female pigeon looking in the mirror see her attractiveness to male pigeons? But it was right after that my husband had the accident. He was working as a carpenter, and the accident occurred because he was having to manage a saw on a big construction outfit, and then he got his hand in the saw and lost 3 fingers. When he was taken to the hospital, Dr. Erickson wanted me to call him. So when I called him, he said, tell him, just as he's coming out of the anesthetic, that I promise him he'll go right on doing his sculpture and his painting. And that was what I told him then, just as he was coming out. He began to sob, and he said, no more painting, no more sculpture. And I said, Dr. Erickson promises you he'll keep right on. And then he went back to sleep. He got in jobs with other doctors that he could do some work for them and things while he was still just on compensation. He came out to see him, visited him as a friend.
So I told him I wanted a divorce, and he got a gun and he was going to kill us both, he said. And so I calmed him down, and he said, let's go talk to somebody. And he says, okay. And I said, let's go talk to Dr. Erickson. So he agreed, and I called, and they said we could come in. It was like at night. We didn't have office hours then, but it was like late at night. In fact, I think Dr. Erickson took people at different times out because he lived in his home. Sometimes he would call him at odd hours, and I think he took people
like maybe at midnight if they needed it or something. Anyway, he came and he was in the office. He went in the office. And first he talked to my ex-husband in the office for a while, and then he called me and he said, "Margie, he's no good. Get rid of him." That was the first time Dr. Erickson and my ex-husband had met each other. Yeah. And he said, you know, he's going to kill you. He's no good. He's never going to be any good, and he's not. And my ex-husband and I said, yeah, you know, I agreed. I knew, but at the time I just couldn't. I said no. I will, but later, you know. And I did about a month or two later. I did finally tell him to make him move out. It's been about 25 years now since the last time since I was married to him. And the last time he called me, about 6 months ago, he said he had been out of the country for a year. He'd been in Greece. And we discussed what happened, and something about he had charged up and written checks and everything to the tune of about $500,000, and he had to leave the country. So obviously Dr. Erickson knew what he was talking about.
He tried to detach me from both of them. Now, he kind of soft-pedaled my mother at first. You got to understand that my mother encouraged me to work with Erickson. She knew that if I ever became involved with Erickson, that it would mean the end of our relationship. I'm sure she knew it. It's one of the most selfless things that I know. On numerous occasions, she tried to get me to move into the apartment with her until my legs would heal. Stop working, stop everything. Well, see, you're dealing with a situation there where you can't fault her intent. I mean, she was doing all that she knew. It just happens that what she knew to do would have destroyed me. That he had a conversation the previous night with my father, and he had, quote, never heard a father express such contempt for his son in his entire career, unquote. I don't know if that's true. I mean, I don't know what that means. I know that he believed that. And that was good enough for me. And I also have recovered my own appearance to my satisfaction. And I hope that that's okay with Erickson. I mean, I kind of feel like he's around and he knows.
Erickson worked in a very pragmatic American way. He gave examples from farm life and not from the scholarly literature. He took a practical, normal family life approach in a way that was new in the field of psychiatry.
When Erickson had space in his new home for seminars, he taught many hundreds of young professionals. His training sessions were unusual. They were like lessons in life or individual therapy in a group setting.
And there were lots of people there and lots of electronic equipment, tape recorders and things like that. He started talking, and I was amazed. First of all, he said something that really took me back. He said there's someone here who was sent off to boarding school when he was 15, even though he'd asked not to be, or something like that, which was a completely accurate detail from my life. It didn't really seem like he said it. It just sort of seemed like it came out. And I looked around, and I wasn't about to say anything because there were all these strangers there. I mean, he must have talked for 4 hours straight. And I couldn't believe I actually sat there and paid attention that long.
There was one about anxiety, about a person with anxiety, and that he was talking about a fellow climbing a pole and learning to be feeling secure even though he was elevated. And I was thinking, God, this is like anxiety about succeeding or something. And I don't know if he's talking about me. And that the man learned sitting in a chair, he felt secure whether the chair was 20 feet in the air or the chair was on the floor. He was still perfectly secure.
I was so amazed that he was so much more alive than I feared he would be. I really expected to find a man more ravaged by his own problems and illness. And when I met him, he seemed so alive.
I spent, I'd say, a good deal of time in his office in a trance, in essence, listening to him. I became very curious during that time about how to be in a trance and how to also stay in a room at the same time. So that was a really interesting part of my learning with him, which is something that has become a very basic part of the way that I do therapy, and also how I teach is in terms of how to try to find a connection between what Erickson called the unconscious and also stay socially responsible.
I have been spending the last 15 years with medicine people, participating in rituals and ceremonies and understanding something about the mystery of the mind. And all of a sudden, here was a psychiatrist, traditionally trained, who was saying things like, it's in the telling of the story.
It was almost an uncomfortable feeling, having his interest focused upon me, and yet so powerfully healing, kind of, in a way, that his attention was so undivided and so focused, and he seemed to have such a joy at attending to me and to my reactions.
The other thing that really blew me away about Erickson was how comfortable he was with his own rudeness, and that gave me a lot of permission.
He changed the way that I viewed therapy. He changed the way that I viewed the problems that people encounter in their lives, from one originally based on pathology to one based on learning.
He was dressed in his ubiquitous costume. He was in a wheelchair. The first thing he did, there were a group of 7 people sitting around, was with enormous strain lean over the side of his wheelchair and to pick up a stone with enormous effort and making noise, and finally lifting it with his hand, nestled it with both hands together, and then threw it at me. I didn't know whether to leap or to scream, and I caught the rock before it landed where I might have ended up with a high-pitched voice forever. And the stone was air. It was just a piece of foam colored like a stone. And he looked at me and said, not everything you see is the way you see it is.
He was a very complex man. Extremely complex, and I loved him dearly. And so did many others. And he was really a loving man.
And he loved gardening. My whole life I can remember gathering mulch for him and planting plants and finding plants and planting trees. And when I was very young, my dad was still walking with a cane, and he would come out and he would help out. And he would do a bit of digging, a bit of clipping. And then as time went on, we'd wheel him out in a wheelchair, and he'd show us what he wanted. And then afterwards we would take big grand tours in the wheelchair of what he wanted to see and how this was growing and that was growing, and he enjoyed that. And then as time went on even further, many times he wouldn't feel well enough to even go out in the yard. And so we would maybe bring him a clipping, or we would count how many flowers there were, and we would tell him. And the thing that I admired the most is he seemed to get as much pleasure out of me bringing in a leaf as he got out of standing with his cane and digging. And I don't think it was just something that happened. I think he taught himself that life changes, but you can still enjoy it.
No, you don't want to come out of the trance. You don't want a charming movie to end. You don't want a flower to win. But you do like reality. And all you do is wonder how charming you will be at 40, 50, and 60. And you wonder all the new things you find 40, 50, 60. Finally, you find out how nice things are in 80. my son grandparents. They taught me. And of course they had good old times in the past. There were the good times are yet ahead of them. After my father's death, we scattered his ashes up there on the mountain.